Osiyam. Chinkun Mintomiap. Kayachton. Skohopmish Ochomeoch. Maltston Ochomeoch. Stamoch Ochomeoch. Chachakanam Siam. I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning. Hands go up to you on behalf of the Skohopmish peoples, our honored guests, our dear elders who have joined us, our people from our village here. On behalf of our leadership and our community, we welcome everybody. Today, the Squamish people welcome our relatives as well from the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh, our neighboring families. We'd also like to welcome those that are with us and not with us from the First Nations Health Authority and the First Nations Health Council. We are honored today to host the Honorable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, Honorable Pani Hajdu. Now, I know we've been waiting patiently. We're eager to move forward to speak with the Prime Minister this morning at our town hall about Indigenous healthcare. Before that, the First Nations Health Council and the Government of Canada has an important announcement. So we'll hear from the First Nations Health Council, the First Nations Health Authority, the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada, and our very own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. First, I would like to invite my council colleague, our chairperson of council, Kaiselam, to share a few words. And after that, he'll introduce our speakers following. Osiyam.
Tanoyap Ansequeto, Tanoyap Siam, Seo Quachit, Tanoyap Eoch Swat, Wa Tlak, 80, Nesta Ans Chalsalem, Chinsetsap not to Skopmish Ochomer, Chin Elsh Askako, Menhat, Stalmoch, Equis Hans Tomiap, to Hat Sietsam, Tuknam, to Qui Yostoi, Neth Sof to Meoch, 80, to Humolston, on Hats and Spawins, Quins, Skaelsh, Askako, 80, to Siam, Justin Trudeau, Timat Tight, Timat Quetsi Queens Nation. Just wanted to welcome each and every one of our relatives, our respected leaders from the various nations, our elders, our people, and all of our guests that are here today. As the chairperson for the Squamish Nation Council, elected in 2021, very honored on behalf of my council and our community here of the Squamish Nation to host all of our relatives on this day for this very historic and special announcement. And just also want to share with all those that are listening and watching who are participating in this to explain what also took place this morning. Just over an hour ago, we hosted the Prime Minister, Minister Hajdu, representatives from the First Nations Health Council, representatives from the First Nations Health Authority, and we came together as different entities to conduct a ceremony in our Coast Salish ways, where we spread blankets down on our longhouse floor. We had blanketed representatives involved in today's announcement and the work that led up to today. And we are very honored to have the Prime Minister stand with us as a part of the family and be a part of the ceremony, to stand with us as First Nations people, as Squamish people with the Health Council and the Health Authority, and participated in the ceremony, to come into our community, to spend time with us, to be with us. And I can't think of anything that is more historic in this journey of reconciliation than to have the Prime Minister come into our community and come be with us the way our old people would and the way our ancestors would for thousands of years. One of our elders shared with us just yesterday how our old people, our old leaders who are no longer with us, how proud they would be to see what is taking place, to imagine the day would come when the Prime Minister of Canada would want to come into our community and come and ask us to do this ceremonial work. And we were reminded by my colleague who shared in the words earlier that it was not too long ago that governments in Canada passed laws to regulate who we were and what we could do as Indigenous people, that the practicing of our culture was banned and outlawed, and that our old people at one point were faced with criminal charges and had to spend time in jail for practicing our culture. But today we worked together to find those common goals, the common dream, and the hope that we create for our future generations, that we can come together, work together, and make positive change for this country. So I'm very proud on behalf of the Squamish Nation to help support the First Nations Health Council and the First Nations Health Authority, the First Nations Health Directors Association, to host the ceremony to ground the announcement and the agreement that has been created for the next 10 years in our Squamish ways, our Coast Salish ways, our Indigenous ways, so that it can set the tone for the next decade and the decades to come, that we can work together to achieve the best health we can possibly achieve for our people, that we're all committed to that work to improve the lives of not just ourselves, but all of our people, all Canadians, all Indigenous people. So I raise my hands to each and every one of you for this chance to celebrate a historic achievement for BC First Nations and for all of Canada. So we say in my language, Chinquan Mantomi, I thank you all. At this time, I would like to call up Wade Grant, who's the chair of the First Nations Health Council.
Siyam Nisiyaya, Siyam Halsilam, the Squamish people, I raise my hands to each and every one of you for allowing us to have this work done today in your lands. As Squamish has said, my English name is Wade Grant. My traditional name, as it was given to me at the Musqueam Longhouse, is Tsola Polano. Today is a historic day, not only for me, but for all First Nations people in British Columbia. I look back at when I was born. 11 days old, my mother was told I had to go and have open heart surgery. 10 years old, I had to have a second open heart surgery. I got the best treatment I knew I was getting, but as I grew older, I realized I was the exception and not the rule. So many of our people, for so many generations, have been forced and faced with health care that was inhumane. And we continue to see sometimes, even today, the racism. But it's from our elders and our ancestors and our leaders, such as the leader whose name is bestowed on this hall, for persevering, for ensuring that colonialism will not overcome who we are. And over 10 years ago, an historic moment happened when First Nations in British Columbia took back how we would advocate for our people, provide for our people with respect to the health care. That was the first step, and there's so many more steps to go. Colonialism has cast a shadow upon our people for many generations, but those people, and I look to the elders around this table, around here tonight, and raise my hands to them because the steps that they took forward have shrunk that shadow. The shadow is still there. We must take more steps towards that light. Towards that light so our children and our grandchildren, when they grow up, that shadow disappears and there's only light. So when we look to what has happened today, it started about a month ago when over 190 First Nations chiefs and leaders came together, and 86% of them voted and said, we want to address the social determinants of health, and we want to ensure that our people have more control over how we administer health in our communities. And with this announcement today, we're starting to see the funding that we need to ensure that those dreams are lived up to. It's our elders, our ancestors, our leaders that are experts in their own community. And over the next 10 years, we're going to take more steps. That shadow will shrink even more. And then when my son and my daughter, who will be 22 and 24 at that time, hopefully they'll be standing in a light. So I say, Prime Minister, Minister, the Squamish Nation, in my language, Aitsep Dasiyam Nisiyaya. And it is my honor to actually recognize some people in the audience that advocate on behalf of First Nations in this province on the Health Council. Will Fathom from the north, Mariah Tarleton from Vancouver Island, Gabe Williams from Vancouver Coastal, Coinco Michelle from the interior, and Maria Martin from Vancouver Coastal as well. And my esteemed colleague who will come forward now, Deputy Chair of the First Nations Health Council, Winnestein Wayne Christian. Hi, go.
Hello everyone. Kamloops West, Winnipeg. In English translation is Big Voices Speaks the Truth. I'm a former Cookbee and tribal chief of the Secwepemc Nation. I was, for 26 years, I was in that role. And currently I sit as the deputy chair on behalf of the interior region for the First Nations Health Council. You know, this is strange to me, quite honestly. People are behind me. I apologize to the people behind me that I got my back to you. No, seriously, in your talk and your speak, you face the people. And I think I want to acknowledge all the people that are behind me and thank you and apologize that you're seeing my back. In our ways of being, in our creation story of the Secwepemc people, the creator or the old one brought 7 laws to our people. The first law that he laid down for our people was health. You think about that. This was how, in the creation of the world as we know it and as you know it, that's one of the laws. The first law was health. And when you think about it in that context, what we're doing today is really significant. Because it was not just the health of us as two-legged, it was the health of the water, the plants, the animals, everything in creation. We have a responsibility for the health of Kika Tamika, Mother Earth. But how do we do that if we're not healthy ourselves as two-legged? We've been struggling with the colonial impacts, the impacts of genocide, the systemic racism. You know, my colleague talks about his experience. We've all had experiences that are not good with the healthcare system. So today, in what we're doing, and this morning, as we're taught, we led through ceremony. And I want to thank the Squamish people, the elders, the speakers, and how that ceremony on the land, because we're taught that the land heals. And that land that we walked on, where ancestors have walked before us, young people, old people, leaders, we open that up to help heal us. So it's important we understand that today it's significant with the adoption of the social determinants of health strategy, the 10-year strategy. And that today we're going to be announcing the commitment of the federal government to contribute financially to that for the next 10 years in the amount of $8 billion over 10 years, plus $5 million per year for 10 years to invest in the social determinants of health, plus a 5% escalator each year compounded. So that's what we see reconciliation in action. You know, I know the Prime Minister has taken a lot of heat from a lot of people. And I was one of them. I used to criticize him just like every other good chief should do, right? Just doing my job, right? But I was there when he announced at the AFN meeting that the most important relationship is the one with our people. And being involved as long as I have been, it brought me to tears. It impacted me in my heart. But the actions after that were somewhat suspect, but that's okay, that's part of the process. When you're changing a system, it doesn't happen in one term. It doesn't happen in one decade, but it has to start somewhere. So Canada working with us and investing in the health of our people so we can become healthy, so we can look after ourselves. In our language, it's called kunukunshut, help yourself. We need to look after ourselves. The colonial system has beaten our people down. And the other part that's most important that Canada is doing with us is kunukuntwak, help each other. Our ancestral leaders in 1910 spoke about the relationship like this. We would stand each other up to be brothers. Everything we would share would be 50-50. What's yours is mine, mine is yours. We'll stand each other up to be great and good. And that's what this government has been doing and working with us. Yeah, it's not all sort of, what's the word? It's not all smooth, but reconciliation, like I think Grand Chief Stewart said, reconciliation isn't for wimps. You got to do some hard work, face some truths. And the truths are, we need to change this health system for the betterment of our people. So today, I see a future where my grandchildren and great-grandchildren won't suffer the racism that my mom suffered. We won't see the opioid deaths that are happening because we can take control of that and do something about it. So I really do applaud all of you being here and the Prime Minister. And I knew his dad actually, so that's how old I am. And that wasn't a good thing, but anyways, that's a whole different story. I was just doing my job as chief, right? That's what you got to do. You got to hold them accountable, right?
And he was doing his.
Yes, exactly. And he was doing his. So we do what we do as leaders, right? So it's a time. I think that's what it is. It's about reciprocal relationships. We've always had those relationships with everything, but we have relationships with the two-legged, and that's what this is as we move forward. So thank you, and all my colleagues on the First Nations Health Authority. You know, it's really an amazing team because I was at the table, but it was the team that did all the work. They're not, you know, it's just amazing what our system, once we start taking control, can do. And there's a lot of people behind the scenes that made us to this point. And I want to thank each and every one of them. And also on the federal government side, in the process with Patrick Boucher, I want to mention him. He's no longer part of the health. I don't know what he did wrong. They put him in charge of the espionage stuff and deal with it. I was saying, what did he do wrong to put him over there? Anyways, that's a whole different story. But I wanted to thank him for his commitment to a reciprocal relationship that's based on us doing things together and having those frank discussions and putting everything on the table. And that's what we did, and we got it done. And I was very quite appreciative of that process. So thank you. And the speaker is Colleen, our chair. Colleen.
Thank you, Wayne. So good morning. My name is Colleen Erickson. I'm from Naka's, the daughter of Sally Prince and Louis Erickson, and a member of the Lucilio clan. I would like to first acknowledge the Squamish people and the territory that we're on today and thank them for they have endeared themselves to this land since time began. and they allow us to conduct this business in their territory today. I have served on the First Nations board since 2014, and the past 5 years as the board chair. On behalf of the board, I am pleased to be here with our federal partners, along with our governance partners, the First Nations Health Council and the First Nations Health Directors Association, for today's announcement for our successor 10-year Canada funding agreement. This agreement recognizes and acknowledges the history and the relationship with BC First Nations communities and nations over the past 20 years, our health and wellness partners. Since its inception, the First Nations Health Authority has been working to address service improvements, systemic barriers, racism, and bringing services closer to home. Through health system innovation and working together, we have been able to redefine First Nations health. A few examples are, First Nations patients are being given the opportunity to guide their own health journey while being supported by healthcare providers who understand that their health and wellness is directly connected to their family, history, culture, and land. Primary care services are being developed and implemented by First Nations, and also improvements to First Nations health benefits. The culture and safety and humility movement was started by the FNHA in 2014 and is now recognized nationally. The work could only be accomplished through partnerships, collaboration, and engagement with First Nations communities with the shared vision of healthy, self-determining, and vibrant BC First Nations children, families, and community. The FNHA board would like to extend a special thank you to Richard Jock, our CEO, and his team of many who have worked incredibly hard over the past 2 years to bring this agreement to fruition. This 10-year agreement speaks to the strong partnership between the FNHA, BC First Nations, federal and provincial governments, regional health authorities, and our other healthcare partners. It is a testament to what we can accomplish by working together. As we move to fulfill our new agreement, I want to acknowledge all those who continue to advance a safer and more accessible healthcare system for First Nations in BC. Sachalia. And I would like now to call on Richard Jock, our CEO.
Thank you, Colleen, and also like to begin by acknowledging the ability to do our work today on the Squamish territories, and also the beautiful and powerful ceremony this morning that started off this next 10-year phase, strongly grounded and based in culture. It's a reminder that the original ceremony took place 10 years ago, which started the first 10-year phase. So again, thank the community for that and for their continued strong advocacy and support. I also want to acknowledge the elders and chiefs that are here, and of course the Prime Minister and Minister Hajdu. The 10-year agreement is key in that it's not all of our financial relationship, but it's a key underpinning to that relationship that is very much foundational to building more and more elements to deal with the many health needs that have been relayed to us over the past 10 years by First Nations individuals, by health directors, and by community leaders. I do want to reflect as well, and I think it's been well stated already, that the negotiation was a team effort. And I do want to acknowledge particularly Sonia Isaac-Mann, who oversaw our internal committee, and we had really rapid response and analysis of the different proposals. And then she also worked with her partner, Julian Castongue, in terms of finalizing some of the details. So really strong effort, a lot of detail, but I think it really does reflect that this was also reflective of a Government of Canada, a ministerial effort, very strong, and that it also was done in a very clear and respectful manner with the First Nations Health Council and First Nations Health Authority. In the course of doing our business proposition, we did look at all of the data that is available and all of the input that has been provided by First Nations communities, and those really informed our negotiations. And I do want to just emphasize that one of the strengths of our approach and of our governance model is the focus on being community-driven and nation-based, and that as we go forward and as we look at how to implement in a way that is directed by First Nations, as we look at how to implement this, that we will be working with First Nations communities to establish those priorities and to make some of those critical decisions. I think it's clear to say that we did hear very clearly about the need for more mental health services, and in particular addiction services, and that the crises in toxic drugs and toxic drug deaths is something that demands immediate attention. So one of the key elements of our agreement is the flexibility to deploy our resources according to need, and we will do so. I just want to also reflect that these 10-year periods were preceded by 10 years of planning, and I want to acknowledge two of the people that were here and were part of that. Doug Kelly, who was chair of the Health Council, but also Ed John, who was part of the first discussions and really started this whole process off. And I think it's important to say that in each of these 10-year periods, we'll be building on these, improving as we go, acknowledging that there is need to continuously improve and improve the quality of our services. I would say the other and last element is that we look forward to continued partnership, that the way to get things done over the past 10 years has been related to establishing effective partnerships. And I would say that's what's unique about this agreement, is that there are good, positive relationships, both with the federal government, but also that the provincial government is bringing resources to bear, and that is unique in Canada. So as we go forward, look forward to the further innovations and dialogues, look forward to the partnership and teamwork, and also to look at the need for healing from the traumas which have been so recently revealed to us in the Kamloops discovery of 215 graves. So as I close, I just want to say that our teams are eager to start and also to achieve this goal of working with communities to make those improvements. I want to acknowledge, lastly, we have two of our youth representatives. They're called, what are they called? Corner posts, or living markers, sorry. But these living markers are going to be here to remind us of our progress over these periods and to make sure that we stay on course. So just want to acknowledge Winona James Point and Janelle Tom, who are two of our corner posts and who will be part of this process going forward. With that, looking forward to the next 10 years and really thankful for this day.
Well, thank you very much to all the speakers. But first of all, thanks so much to Squamish Nation, Solomon Council for the families, and the incredible ceremony that I was able to participate in. It's such an honor to be part of this work, but it's such an honor to participate in ceremony as a non-Indigenous person. And I encourage every non-Indigenous person to be part of the work of reconciliation, which is to understand each other. You know, when the Prime Minister first asked me to be the Minister of Indigenous Services, there was some reluctance in my heart. I knew this was a colonial role, and I knew this was a job that many previous ministers had performed in a way that made life harder for Indigenous people. And so it was a very serious consideration that I had to give to doing this work. It's hard to hear the stories of a country that has inflicted colonialism on people, even as a colonizer, if you're open to the pain of that. It's hard to be part of a system that has caused such deep and profound anguish and trauma for all of us. Of course, it's harder to be the victim, but it is hard to come to terms with that. And it's through ceremony that we learn more about each other. It's through ceremony that we learn about the important roles we have as leaders. As one elder said today, as one speaker, one witness said today, so that we can make life better for the next generation, even if we don't see it in our own work today. That's a hard thing to do things today that you might not get credit for, that people might not understand, that you might not get elected again for, but that you know in your heart is the right thing to do. That you know in your heart is what your ancestors would want you to do if they could do things over again. And I profoundly believe that my ancestors, French Canadians, if they could have done things over again, would want to do things in a way that would protect us all from the harms that we've seen in this country. So I raised my hands to those that did this work, and I learned this here. I raised my hands to those that did this work 2 decades ago, but 3 decades ago and 4 decades ago, who clung to tradition and language and culture, even when people were getting arrested and beaten and ripped away from families, knowing that they had to hold on to something to give to the next generation. Those are the people that did the work so that we could be here today. The work that the First Nations Directors Association, Health Council, and Health Authority does is not easy or straightforward. It is about healthcare, as you heard today. It is about healing that is complex, from the toxicity of colonization and the many ways that it harms bodies and minds and spirits. But it's also about wellness, which is a concept that so many people struggle to understand. You might have seen me smile every time I heard people say social determinants of health. Years ago, before I was a politician, I worked exclusively in the social determinants of health, and my husband then said, no one understands what you mean when you say social determinants of health. You have to figure out a better way to say it. And I came up with the idea that it meant a fair chance for everyone to succeed, for everyone to live to be their true, full expression of themselves. So it's so exciting to see the direction of the First Nations Health Authority and the next 10 years and the plan about not just healing people from extraordinary wounds and illness and all kinds of health challenges, but to create wellness in community, to create communities and people that have the strength and the purpose and the vision that we're all entitled to. I'm just one part of this work. It's an honor for me to stand here today, to be a witness to this incredible work, to be an ally in the decolonization of structures that have not served Indigenous people since we first met. But I don't do this work alone. I do it with all of you as partners, and I do it with the Prime Minister. And so as I pass the mic over to him, I want to thank him for the opportunity to serve my country in the most meaningful way I have been able to do since I've been elected, and certainly since I've been a working professional. And I want to thank the First Nations Health Authority and Council and Directors Association for the inspiration that you're providing to the rest of the country. This is a model that can be replicated. And when people all across this country understand that we are only as healthy as the sickest amongst us, that's when we'll really start to heal together. Thank you very much, and over to you, Prime Minister.
Good morning. Bonjour. Thank you, Patty, for that introduction. I want to begin by thanking the Squamish Nation, Chief Koselim, and Council for having us in your land today. I want to acknowledge Chief Wayne Sparrow of Musqueam First Nation and Chief Jen Thomas of Tsleil-Waututh First Nation, who are also here with us today. Wade, Wayne, Colleen, Richard, thank you for your words, your leadership, and all the work you do as part of the First Nations Health in BC. Regional Chief Gigi, it's great speaking with you earlier. National Chief Archibald, Roseanne, great to see you too. And all of you here. As Wayne pointed out, awkward to stand with my back to you, but know that we're also speaking to millions of Canadians across the country who are deeply inspired by what has been done here in BC. And very much hoping to be able to move forward and draw on the incredible work you've done over decades to get to this, and also the work that you've done over the past decade in making First Nations Health Authority and Council a reality that is leading the way in this country in tangible ways on reconciliation that is hugely important. So I'm glad to be here with you. Look forward to hearing your stories in a little bit. But we'll continue to make sure that all Canadians are hearing about the extraordinary work done here today. I also want to extend a special thank you to Elizabeth Ross and Melina Joseph for including me and the entire community, for including me in the blanketing ceremony we had earlier. It was a true privilege to learn from your teachings, and for this community to let me be a part of the ceremony recognizing the renewal of this historic agreement. I couldn't help but reflect as well on the fact that for decades and generations, the idea of a Prime Minister joining in this ceremony as a participant, being able to learn from the traditions and gain a deep, deep appreciation by being part of momentous moments, not just in this community and this province, but momentous moments for this country that are shaped and led by the communities themselves was really important. I think Patty did an extraordinary job of sharing how much this matters. Patty, I do want to thank you for all the dedication and energy that you bring. When we first met before politics, I recognized in you the incredible devotion to building better communities. Your work in Thunder Bay, in extremely difficult social circumstances and conditions for so many of the residents, is something that you have brought to a larger scale without losing your personal compassion and connection with people that leaves not just this government, but this country so much better for your work and service. Thank you, my dear friend. Merci aussi à la communauté qui nous a accueillis aussi aujourd'hui. Le fait de participer à des pratiques traditionnelles, culturelles, aide à orienter l'important travail qu'on doit accomplir ensemble. Earlier today, in that ceremony alongside elders, young people, and other First Nations communities from across BC, We heard from witnesses who talked about how they've seen this agreement work in their communities and what improvements they know we still have to move forward on. A decade ago, the Government of Canada transferred control over federally funded First Nations health programs and services in British Columbia to a province-wide First Nations-led organization, the First Nations Health Authority. This has transformed how healthcare is delivered to First Nations in BC. It's about self-determination. It's about ensuring decisions that impact the health of First Nations will be made by First Nations. It's been a decade of learning an awful lot, and it's important from our government that we continue to hear from you about what is working and what we can and must do to improve outcomes. So today we are announcing the renewal of the 10-year Canada funding agreement with the First Nations Health Authority in British Columbia. It will continue to support the FNHA in their work to design, manage, and deliver and fund First Nations healthcare in over 200 First Nations communities here in this province. This renewal is about improving delivery and meeting the unique health needs of First Nations communities, things like more community-based approaches to healthcare, recognition of the intergenerational trauma that impacts well-being in your communities, innovative mental health and wellness care, work to continue to address those social determinants of health, and ensuring that as First Nations you can have access to culturally safe care on your land and in your language. As part of all this, we will keep working to strengthen our tripartite agreements so that First Nations get quality healthcare no matter what healthcare system they use. Ce financement et le renouvellement de l'entente sur 10 ans avec la Régie de la santé des Premières Nations de la Colombie-Britannique ont amélioré les résultats en santé et renforcé l'autodétermination des communautés. The FNHA model here in BC is the first of its kind in Canada. It is a model for how we can support the transformation of First Nations health from coast to coast to coast. Similar initiatives are underway. In Nova Scotia, through the Tajik-Gelmuk, the newly established Mi'kmaq Health Authority. In Ontario, the Anishinaabe-Aski Nation. And also, work is ongoing in Manitoba and in Quebec. Ce travail s'ajoute aux nombreuses mesures que l'on prend pour combler l'écart en matière de soins de santé auxquels sont confrontés les peuples autochtones. Depuis 2015, on a fait des investissements majeurs sans précédent. And through our recent budget, we're making historic investments to strengthen healthcare for everyone in Canada, including a very specific $2 billion Indigenous Health Equity Fund to support First Nations, Inuit, and Métis partners in closing healthcare gaps. We'll keep moving forward on Joyce's principle, because every Indigenous person deserves equal access and quality healthcare free from racism and discrimination. Et on va continuer d'investir dans le principe de Jordan pour s'assurer que les enfants des Premières Nations reçoivent les soins de santé dont ils ont besoin. Avec l'annonce d'aujourd'hui, on soutient votre vision pour de meilleurs soins de santé. Today's announcement is about making sure that First Nations in Canada have the best possible health outcomes. And we know this is only possible if we work together in collaboration and cooperation. The work we did together between governments paved the way for this work to happen. We need this type of collaboration and cooperation right across the country so that we can ensure that First Nations have their voices heard and can lead on healthcare in their own communities. In renewing this deal, we're also continuing the important work of renewing Canada's relationship with First Nations and with all Indigenous peoples. So thank you for being here today. Merci. Chen Kwenman Tomi.
Usiam. Yuan Hat. Yuan Hath to our speakers. My hands go up to the words that are shared. As hosts of such a sacred event this morning, but also it took place in our longhouse just a few steps from here. And I mentioned in our language, Chotokenam Siam, late Chief Joe Mathias, this building is named after him. I say that because I put our hands up to leaders that helped pave the way for where we are today. We first opened these doors to the Prime Minister of the day, who landed in a helicopter on the pad in the front. So we are not unknown to host these kind of events. Our Squamish peoples have been hosting peoples with our doors open since time immemorial. Not only that, with our Indigenous Squamish peoples. And I say this because we hear about relationships. These relationships have continued, but they have progressed. Before reconciliation, it was protection of our Indigenous rights and our title. It's protecting who we are and where we come from. These are just some of the words we've heard this morning as well, but they're just teachings that have come out. But also, it is the hope we provide for tomorrow and the hope that we are enlightened with from today that gives us and continues to give the passion, not only to the ones standing here, it's the ones we've learned from our elders, it's the teachings we are passing down to our youth and our munman, our children, so they, not only we share the stories and the teachings, but they are not afraid to use their voice and empower each other as future leaders, but as future community. And I thank our Prime Minister and our Minister and our leaders for their words and the stories shared. I want to acknowledge everyone from the teachings we had in our longhouse. Those who weren't there, no worries. Our ancestors were in the building. Your lineages were in the building, witnessing the work that took place. And I'll leave with this before we move on to our town hall, that the messages that keep our heads high is we are paving the way for the generations ahead. We talk about late Chief Joe Mathias preparing for the 7 generations of tomorrow, because we do the work not for us, it's for the people and the stronger community that we have in front of us. Thank you. I thank our speakers. I think I'm to direct you to sit down. I too. What we'll do is the Q&A town hall is open to everyone in the audience behind me, and we have floaters with microphones, and those who do want to ask a question to our Prime Minister, all questions are asked, don't need to be directly on health. And with that, I think if those who are asking questions, we're asking you to stand up, identify yourself. If you can stand or not, you don't have to, and then we'll move forward and with the questions. Okay. Oh, they'll bring a mic to you. Yeah, so no need to rush around. The mic will come to you. And with some grapes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. There we go. This is really, I mean, this is a big, important day in terms of renewal of this agreement, in terms of how we move forward. And there have been a lot of important speeches, but a big part of it for me is to be able to hear from you, to hear your feedback, your questions, your concerns, your issues, your hopes. Politics has become more about speaking and not enough listening. And I know that in longhouses or in community centers and Indigenous traditions, it's really important to be able to listen to each other. So I'm not going to give another speech now. I very much want to hear from people here on what's on your mind and where we're going. I'm going to start in this corner here, and I will work my whole way around the room and give people opportunities to ask questions of me if that's what you have, or share with me something you feel I should know. This is an opportunity for me to learn how things are going and what's on your minds right now. It's a really important part of my responsibility and how I'm able to serve all of you in what we do. So we'll start with you right here. Yep, there's a mic coming to you right now.
Thank you, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for coming to the Squamish Nation. I don't know if you recognize this. I'm one of the mothers of the Vancouver National Indigenous Missing Murdered Inquiry. And when you said you were going to implement all 231 calls to justice, that was the first time I stepped off the reservation to vote. And they still haven't been implemented, Prime Minister. I grew up my only grandson, who's a child of my late daughter, on $160 per month from Squamish Nation Social Services and Housing until his graduation. Could you do that? Could you raise a child and transfer it to another Tri-City on $160 per month? That's how much I got to raise my grandson till graduation. And I'm still waiting for you to fulfill your promise, Prime Minister, for all the National Indigenous missing murdered across Turtle Island. Please fulfill your promise, acknowledge those all 231 calls to justice. And I want to know how fair you think it is that I raised him on $160 per month. Could you, Ayasmenmen? That's why I got your card, Jared. I want to be able to talk to you guys about that. I want to be added on to that compensation because he was a child, a relative in care. If he was in foster care, Prime Minister, he would have had everything done for him. He would have met all the health requirements and not rejected to any help. He was rejected from any help because I was his grandmother taking care of him. Today, he's graduated and a working member in our Squamish community. But you guys take this home to heart. Can you raise a child on $160 per month till graduation? It is not right. And I'm glad I said that today so my leadership can hear that in the services that they provide here on the nation. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot more work to do on ending the ongoing tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls across this country. We put forward the national inquiry. We accepted all the calls to justice. And we've put forward a national action plan with $125 million towards it as we move forward. But there is so much more to do, and you are right to highlight that. It's not something the federal government can do alone, obviously. It's something that all Canadians need to be part of, all different orders of government, all community leadership. We're changing mindsets. We're working on social determinants of violence, of echoes of intergenerational trauma, of colonial violence, of lateral violence. There is a lot to do, but it is work that we have begun in serious ways, and we will continue to. In terms of child and family services and care, we co-developed over the past years historic agreements to make sure that we're keeping Indigenous kids out of provincial care, where they lose their languages, their culture. One of the first agreements we signed was with the Cowessess Nation in Saskatchewan, where kids who are in risk situations remain within their communities, raised by appropriate language supports, cultural support, so they don't lose that, which has led to further loss of identity and trauma and all the echoes that come with that. But we need to make sure as well that the aunties and grandmothers who are also taking care of kids who otherwise might end up in the system are being properly supported on that. And that's work that we have to do together. Yes, the federal government has a bit of a role in that. Lots of provinces have to have a role in that. But also, as you pointed out, Chief and Council have to be part of that as well. And we need to keep doing better. So thank you for sharing deeply. Thank you. Next question. We had, okay, you, sir.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for being here today.
Sorry, remind us of your name.
Okay, Rennie, I'm Deegan Rennie Nahaney, Squamish Nation member, 555-0641. You know the expression, the canary in the mines. They had the canary there because in the mines, when poisonous gases would come out, the canaries could die. Well, guess who the new canaries are in Canada and the States? They're Indians. Now, why is that? And I'll tell you why. Environment Canada is renting a place down here, and they haven't built there because it's polluted. We have CNN running through Aslahan, blasting their horns. It's hard to get sleep down there. And so all these corporations, with all their mining and their digging, I believe they need to be reminded by the government of Canada that, you know, you've got to do something about this. Part of the reasons that we have health issues is because of what's taking place with these mining corporations and forestry and everything else. The other medical is good to have, and I appreciate that, but where is this all coming from? And that's the corporations and the effects of the residential school, which I'm glad you're here to help today. And I don't know how you would do it to help us take care of the problem with those corporations. You know, to send them a message or a memo or some kind of agreement, because we can't keep going on this way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is right now a understanding that is slowly coming to non-Indigenous people across this country and around the world that Indigenous peoples have known for a long time. That if you care for Mother Earth, she will care for you. And if you don't, nothing else will matter. And that has been too long in coming. If Canadians over the past generations and centuries have done a better job of actually learning how to be stewards of the land and stewards of the responsibilities we have for future generations from the people who've lived here from time immemorial. We might be in a different position right now. But better late than never. And we are seeing a deep shift around the world right now, understanding that reducing pollution, being more responsible about protecting nature, with ambitious targets that Canada led on in last year's COP15 in Montreal to protect 30% of our lands and waters around the world by 2030, leading the way in Canada. But more than that, there is an understanding that we cannot build a strong economy for the future unless we are at the same time protecting the environment. Not just as a moral imperative, because it's the right thing to do, but as a necessary condition for the future success and well-being of coming generations. And people are getting that. And that's why all of a sudden we're seeing more corporations actually looking to invest in Canada in proper ways, in thoughtful ways. Because yes, we're going to need economic activities. We're going to need to make sure people have jobs. We're going to need to make sure that the resources that we have that the world needs are developed in fair, responsible, cleaner ways that are linked to success of people who've been protecting this land and living on this land for millennia. But that's actually something that's not just an obligation, it's also an advantage, a competitive advantage for Canada. As people look at what mining companies have done around the world, as people look at what industrialization without thought of environmental consequences or good quality middle-class jobs for people coming through it, we've seen destabilizations in our society that are significant. So we will continue to make sure we're stepping up on putting a price on pollution, as BC has done for many, many years before we did it at the federal level. Moving forward on stronger environmental requirements, moving forward on labor requirements in our tax credits that we're putting forward to develop those kinds of good jobs for the future, to make sure people are getting paid good wages that they can support their families and their communities on. But also a key part of that is going to be an expectation, which is why we are implementing the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People at the federal level, as BC has done just a few years ago. Integral to that is building true partnerships with Indigenous peoples across this land, so that we know we're doing things the right way for the long term and the right way for the people who have always been stewards of this land and always should. So thank you for your question, Randy. Another question. Here we go. Yes, you, right there.
Tuaksitnin, in the language of my Tsimshian ancestors, Ni'it, hello, Prime Minister Trudeau, thank you for being here. I want to acknowledge the First Nations Health Authority for extending the invitation for me to be here, and for the Squamish people to open their doors so generously, and Elder Sequoia, as always, for just giving the strength and power that we need as people, so thank you. I have a question that's directly related to the first words that we heard from the two questions about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, about the impact of industrialization that is beyond just the environmental issues, that relates to anywhere we have seen industry come into a community, we see a ripple out of effect of negativity. And the cost for that has never really been attributed to the revenues that get generated. And I've been pushing for this for a long time. My name is Margaret Foe. I'm the CEO for the Aboriginal Housing Management Association. I'm also an inaugural board member for the brand new National Indigenous Collaborative Housing Incorporated, NISHI, who is negotiating with many of your ministers, Minister Hajdu in particular, so I'm sorry I didn't get to see her before she left. But everything attached to the crises that we're seeing today can be tied back to a lack of investment in housing. And I can't say another word without acknowledging that past Grand Chief Doug Kelly taught me many, many years ago that, you know, for most of our people in crisis in addictions, in the sex trade industry, in homelessness, that for them to start to make their first step out of homelessness or out of addiction or out of domestic violence or out of the sex trade, they need to have a safe place to rest. Those are the words that Grand Chief Doug Kelly had said to me many, many years ago when we were actually fighting over a housing unit for somebody that he loved. And it was a learning lesson for me to realize that housing is the panacea for so many things that our people are struggling with. And as a 60s scoop child, when I think about all of the youth aging out of care that have nowhere to go, that have no contact with their culture, no sense of belonging, we have a lot of investment that needs to be done, and your own councils have advised you that the minimum investment from an urban Indigenous lens is $6.3 billion per year over the next 10 years. So we were honored to hear that Budget 2023 included a $4 billion commitment over the next 10 years. I'd like to know how we scale that up quicker to closer to the 6.3 billion, and I'd like to know if we can expedite the release of that money because it's earmarked for 2024, but our people are dying on our streets right now without that investment. So I'd like to know how we could do that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. My friend Adam Vaughan, who was an MP but a longtime housing advocate in Toronto, used to always point out that yes, housing is a problem, but housing is also first and foremost a solution. It's a solution to so many other things, as you point out. If you cannot feel safe where you rest, whether it's addictions, whether it's education, whether it's cycles of violence or trauma, you have no home base from which to actually start the work and the healing that is necessary. Which is one of the reasons why, as a government, we decided to get back into the business of housing after the previous Harper government chose not to. They didn't feel that federal government had a role to play in housing, but we disagree. And we have, over the past years, through various things, through our national housing strategy, through investments, seen millions of families into new homes, including significant reductions in homelessness and poverty rates across the country. At one point, although right now we're seeing a new spike in that because of all the different challenges facing, whether it's inflation, whether it's supply chain disruptions, whether it's consequences of the pandemic, whether it's cycles of violence that are spiking again. There's so much more work to do. You talk about the need for speed on this. Our rapid housing initiative that we're in a third cycle of already has been extremely effective at moving quickly, whether on modular housing or converting existing places like former hotels and such into places that can be that quick emergency housing, but we need to do more. We put $4 billion towards a housing accelerator fund, which is focused on municipalities creating more density quickly, unlocking their ability to move forward. Because as much as we'd like to, the federal government isn't in the business of directly building housing. We need to work with provinces, we need to work with municipalities, and we need people to actually hold the hammers and nails and get them done in the right and responsible way. So there's structures that have to go, so we're putting that money in to accelerate those structures to be able to get hundreds of thousands of new units in the coming years. On top of that, as you mentioned, a specific urban, northern and remote Indigenous housing strategy, $4 billion. It's not enough. But what we are hoping is we are going to be able to build those successes as quickly as possible, build on the successes of the past years to move forward in a very, very real way. And it goes beyond the challenge of just the decades-long housing crisis in Indigenous communities right across this country. We're now seeing housing crises in just about all populations across the country, in all parts of the country. One of the solutions to that actually is around immigration, because we're seeing construction and labor shortages that are making it harder to actually build those homes. So we're building We're bringing in more immigration so that we can actually build more homes because we need more homes. There's a cycle in there that we're trying to stay on the good side of. But the work that your organization is doing as partners, the work that so many incredible groups and visionary community leaders are doing is helping inform the work we're doing. But again, we have to do these things as partners. Partnerships sometimes slow things down, but I believe it can also accelerate things, and that's what we'll continue to do. Thank you for your work while you're doing that. Thank you. One more question. Sorry, do you have a question? So look at me, and then I can hand it to you there. All right. And then we'll move on to this section here.
Hello, my name is Ruth Cairns, Squamish member. Okay, because poor oral hygiene is connected to diseases such as heart disease, dementia, as well as other things like, job opportunities, a lot of things. Would you be expanding dental care to make it part of our health care system for everybody? Yeah.
That is a great question, Ruth, and it gives me an opportunity to pitch what we've done in Budget 2023. We just actually announced, actually started last year, a dental care program to make sure that everyone in Canada can get dental care. Because as you say, we now know, it was always sort of arbitrary to separate dental care from the rest of health care because we know that oral health, as you say, is whole body health at the same time. So as of last year, we started a program so kids under 12 whose families otherwise weren't able to send them to the dentist now have money to be able to go to the dentist, and that was 250,000 kids who have now benefited from that just in a few months. But that was while we were building the larger program that will start delivering benefits by the end of this year to kids under 18, seniors, and people living with disabilities who have no insurance and are in a family income of less than $90,000 a year. On our way within a few years to making sure that everyone in this country under $90,000 a year with no otherwise dental insurance will be able to access that. If you're under $70,000 a year, you will get dental care at no cost right across the country. We cannot continue to be a country where someone can look at the quality of your smile and make a guess at how much money your parents made while you were going through childhood. That is not the country we want to be. Is it going to be integrated part of our healthcare system? I'd like to see that, but the provinces deliver a healthcare system, and this is something that the federal government has decided we're going to do and ensure for everyone across the country. It will, in many places, end up being integrated into a provincial system. I have no doubt, but right now it's something that we've decided to do at the federal level that we're going to make sure applies to everyone right across the country. Thank you, Ruth. Okay, a question from this section. Yes.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. I would like to thank you for acknowledging my daughter, Elizabeth Ross, to help you with the organization of the Longhouse ceremony. My daughter has worked very, very hard to become culturally knowledgeable, but she's not a member. My daughter is not a member of the Squamish Nation. I'm a Bill C-31 Indian. My mother married a non-native in 1951, and when she was encouraged by the priest that was going to marry them to sign her enfranchisement documents before she was married, she received a nominal sum of money of a few $100s for giving up her status. And I don't know how many other people or other members are here today who have children or grandchildren who have unable to get status. This is totally injustice. It's not fair. You know, my Squamish heritage comes from the Baker and the Joseph family. And why is it that some of our children and grandchildren have been excluded from having status? Without status, they can't, until now, have not been able to get membership. totally unfair. And I'd love to hear your comments. I'm quite disappointed that the minister has left because I wanted to ask her these questions as well. Thank you very much.
No, why did it happen? A big part of it is sexism. There was a difference in how women who married men outside of non-status men were treated differently than men who married non-status women. And that has a legacy of inequity that continues to this day. I know it's something that there are ongoing conversations about. We've made some improvements and fixes in that. But it's something that we have to continue to work with Indigenous communities themselves, with First Nations communities themselves, because how we make sure that we're going back the right way, including the right people, fixing errors of the past in ways that create value and maintain identity for the future isn't something that the federal government can do alone. One of the things I definitely want to stay away from is the federal government saying, okay, your status and you're not, and you should be and you shouldn't be. That's not something that we want colonial structures that are still colonial structures to be determining, but we can and need to ensure that the rules are fair and that they're properly applied by communities and nations in a way that's responsible. If it was easy work, it would have been done already, because there's a number of governments who have noted that. There are complexities in there that are being worked out, and I can tell you the minister is working and looking very, very keenly at this, but we will continue to follow up with you on that. And thank you, and I have to say I was truly, truly grateful to have Elizabeth steer me through the wonderful ceremony that was totally new for me, so thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Saul Joseph, I'm a member of Squamish. I wanted to ask about lands. So recently we've seen the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery by the Vatican. The doctrine underpins almost everything, the legal foundation of this country, including the assertion of crown sovereignty. I want to know what your plan is for withdrawing the doctrine of discovery throughout Canadian law. And I also want to know the rights that flow from lands, how you plan to address the balance of rights with the provinces, including through the Natural Resource Transfer Acts and the sovereignty acts that we're seeing from the provinces.
Great and complex question. The work of reconciliation is to make sure that we are ending the unfair practices of the past and move forward in the real partnership that, quite frankly, was part of the intent of the original treaties, which were almost immediately ignored and repudiated. The federal government has stepped up in a number of cases in compensations. I think of Siksika Nation in Alberta, where we recently signed well over $1 billion worth of compensation, because the treaties that have been signed over 100 years ago were almost immediately just brushed aside and violated. And we're going to continue to do that. Obviously, there's situations in which it is simply not feasible to give back lands. But there are certainly lots of ways to make sure that there is compensation. And in some cases, there will be lands coming back. In other cases, it's proper compensations. I mean, the Chinook housing complex that we announced last year with Squamish Nation is a really exciting piece of how we're trying to move forward to recognize errors of the past, but build forward in constructive ways moving forward. Around First Nations rights, around resources, you have been stewards of this land forever. And the benefits of this land, you do need to be part of. There is right now, and I was reflecting on this yesterday in a town hall at First Nations University in Regina, there is a sense that well, the federal government should take away the resource control from the provinces, because right now the provinces are not being very good about sharing resource benefits with the Indigenous peoples. And the federal government seems to be there for a keen partner, and we're saying, yes, we want to do that. It's a bad idea to shop around jurisdictions when one happens to be more favorable and the others are worse. We need to go at the root causes of the challenges, and that is whoever has control of jurisdictions because of colonial past and structures, whether it be provinces or federal, we have to do the work of fixing it. And I know BC has been forward-leaning on many, many parts of reconciliation, but there are real challenges that remain, obviously. Fewer challenges than certain other parts of the country where there is an unwillingness to truly engage in UNDRIP, in the Partnership of Reconciliation. But it's part of the work we're all going to have to do. And continuing to expect, as Canadians and as citizens of provinces across the country, expect that our governments and our leaders do this because it's the right thing to do, is something that's going to have to matter at provincial ballot boxes. And it's why I always encourage Indigenous peoples to understand that you can be a strong and loyal and real and full, complete Indigenous person, and yet still vote in a federal election without that taking away any of your rights and strength and identity as a proud Indigenous person. Because if you are not making your views and your choices matter in decisions at the government level, however imperfect they are, well, they are not going to get more perfect. And that's one of the challenges that people have to take on across the country and are taking on. But yeah, there's lots of work to do, and the understanding, I think, is starting to come in a number of places that it's not just about doing the right thing or the moral thing or the just thing or fixing history and being the country we want to be. It's actually about cold hard economics too. In places where there are good partnerships with Indigenous communities that are able to actually get things done and build projects that create economic benefits and welcome in investment and do it in a way where the benefits are properly shared in a respectful way, well, things get done better and quicker, and people prosper more rapidly than if there have to be protests and taking people to court and challenging them because they didn't do the right things, and then suddenly we're 10 years in on a project that sort of says, okay, I'm just walking away, I'm going to go invest in Bolivia or somewhere else. We have an obligation to show that we can do this together. There are places in this country that are doing it better than others, but we all need to continue to step up. So thank you, Saul, for your question. All right, we're running out of time, and there are still so many questions. So I'm going to take groups of 3 questions right here. I'll take one of the 2 of you. You can decide, and a question in the back, and then you on the side there. Sorry, is that mean? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Yiltze Ilowit. I'm the youngest daughter of the late Chief Simon Baker and Emily Rivers. I'm here to advocate for the elders. My father passed away in 2000, and he was fighting for a home for our elders, a full care home, for 10 years before he passed away. And unfortunately, I had to watch my sister and my mother go into homes spread across North and West Vancouver with no Indigenous people in there. And my mom was actually in there for 7 years. She lived to be 104. And as you can see, there's a lot of elders here. I don't like to admit I'm an elder, but apparently I am. But we want to stay in our community, and we want full-time care. We attempted to keep my mom at home, but the cost of the care for her, to have a full-time worker, none of us could afford. So we are knowledge keepers. We hold a lot of knowledge. If we were together in one home being cared for, I think we would live a lot longer. is there going to be any money set aside for First Nations full-time facilities, full-time care?
Thank you. Yes. I'll take that answer, but I'm going to take a couple more questions. Yes, and then we'll come back to that. Perfect.
Hi, I'm Glenda Gibbon. I'm the Director of Yoswai Health and Wellness for Squamish Nation. My question's around our family practice contracts with the Ministry of Health. So Indigenous communities continue to have challenges with the Ministry of Health regarding negotiations for suitable practitioners and their contracts to support our health clinics. This makes recruitment and retention of our practitioners almost impossible. The current family practitioner contracts available to us either contain deliverables with high patient panel numbers that we cannot accommodate, or are financially much less competitive than off-reserve fee-for-service compensation models. We require a contract that reflects a true reconciliation process that is suitable for Indigenous specific health clinics. One that recognizes, compensates, and encourages relational care for our highly complex patient panels. How will our government ensure our voices are heard and direct action is taken?
Glenda, when you talk about the Ministry of Health, you're talking about the Provincial Ministry of Health, right? Okay. And third question.
Aitsquel chu uklas lichin suta hashquiaxops kinquashta comploxops ohoxa ichum munuquin ochis chisma. My English name is Mariah Charleson. My Ko'as name is Luchin Suta. I'm from the Heshkut First Nation. I belong to the House of Kinquashtakomth. I'm here today as the Nuu-chah-nulth representative for the Health Council. And as I sat, watched, and listened this morning, I'm reflecting on a story that I was told when I was a little girl. And it's a story that took place thousands upon thousands of years ago. And it was a time that it was the Kwayatsik. The Kwayatsik, the wolf people, were the only beings on the entire planet that had access to fire, heat, light. And all of the other animals and all of the other beings around wanted some of that light, some of that heat, some of that power. And right now I see Canada as that Kwayatsik. And it took the little Muachmit, the son of deer, to be able to come in and access, and it was through trickery. It was because he caught the wolf people, he got them all amazed because of his amazing skills at dancing, and he tied little pieces of cedar around his knees, and he was able to capture some of that light, some of that fire to bring back to his people. And I want to know how your government, how Canada is going to allow us to have some of that fire so that we can take care of ourselves. We can cook the foods when we want. We can have light 24 hours a day, that we're not stuck waiting for Canada. And I know that your government is currently working on a federal health legislation. I have the honor of chairing our Nuu-chah-nulth Health Caucus, and I hear from our amazing chiefs and leaders when I have this opportunity to chair these family meetings. And the last time we talked about this federal health legislation, I heard loud and clear from our chiefs and leaders, this is a nation-to-nation discussion. We want Canada to come to our people to discuss this federal health legislation. We have well over 10,000 members in Nuu-chah-nulth, and over 80% of our people live away from home. So this federal health legislation is going to be huge. Not all of our people live in our communities. Our Nuu-chah-nulth people want to know, how is this federal health legislation going to impact our modern day treaties as opposed to our non-treaty nations? Our chiefs and leaders have asked, is this federal health legislation going to incorporate our traditional values and our traditional healing? Is this federal health legislation going to have a strategy on ending the racism that is apparent in every corner of where we try and access healthcare? Is there going to be a strategy on including the voices of our youth? We've heard this loud and clear that our youth voices are being oppressed, and we cannot stand for it any longer. So those are my little questions. I have so much more, but thank you for the time. Tleko, tleko, chu.
Thank you. To answer that question first, yes. Yes, those are all questions that we are working on now, and the reason we are working on those exact questions is because the First Nations health legislation is being developed in deep partnership and consultation with Indigenous communities and leaders right across the country. We cannot move forward without the work to be done of what is actually needed and what is actually wanted and to be directed by Indigenous people in this process. The idea that the federal government or anyone in Ottawa could say what is exactly needed in one community or even all communities was the failing of colonialism in the first place. Even if it was theoretically or objectively the right answer, in the rare cases that a stop clock is right twice a day, it couldn't actually be the right answer because it came from outside and not from within. And that's the work of reconciliation that we're doing. And yes, we will be working together on that legislation. We will make sure that these issues are part of what we're doing. And quite frankly, as we move forward on Indigenous health legislation, we are deeply, deeply learning and inspired by the successes here in British Columbia of the First Nations Health Authority on how to do things well. Not perfectly, because what's not perfect is probably our fault, but there's still lots more to do that we're learning on together. Glenda, yes, you know what we're announcing today is the family is a tripartite agreement. The government of BC is part of the conversations around the First Nations Health Authority. We need to make sure that there is an improvement in family practices, particularly access to family doctors that are so important. That's actually an explicit part of the health agreements that we are moving forward on negotiating with the provinces that we announced in this budget, close to $200 billion over the next 10 years in money for health. But we are tying that to a few very concrete things like clear deliverables and measurable outcomes so everyone can see what's working, what's not, and how things are being delivered. Because if you don't measure it, you can't actually improve it. And that's a big part of what we're moving forward on. But other pieces we're doing is access to family doctors, access to better mental health care, more support for frontline health workers. So these are all part of it. I can't speak to the direct delivery of health care and the way BC is doing that. Those are conversations to have with the BC Ministry of Health. But know that we are trying from the federal level to ensure that the outcomes are measured and that there is a more emphasis on family doctors and family services. And then finally, on elders, we need to do a much better job across this country at supporting our elders. We saw during the pandemic how vulnerable our elders were in Indigenous, but specifically in non-Indigenous communities. I think non-Indigenous communities, particularly non-Indigenous and non-immigrant communities where we have more multi-generational homes in new Canadian communities, would do a lot better by learning from how Indigenous traditions honor, respect, and empower elders to be active as not just knowledge keepers, but as those deep connections with young people. In stories where we see young people who are at risk, who suddenly find themselves and find their path, usually it's not a parent who made the difference, usually it's a grandparent who made the difference. Well, because young people want to be heard and valued and want to know that people are there to take time with them. And mom and dad are often busy working and providing and doing things, and elders often are able to just sit and say, okay, let's just be together and let me share. Let me enjoy your presence and help you with this journey you're taking. And we have lost something in Canada in general, but across Western societies, at having young people raised by just seeing grandma maybe once a week on Sunday dinners or for holidays. And what we could learn about creating spaces where, first of all, elders are able to flourish and share and be in their culture and their languages day in and day out, but also a place where we can bring in young people and make sure that intergenerational connections are there is a good thing. We have programs and we have money towards elder lodges and supports like that, but we need to do more, and it needs to be prioritized both by Indigenous communities and councils, by federal government, and by provincial governments as well. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, we'll have time for 3 last questions here. We'll go with you, we'll go with you in the back, and we'll go with you with the hat. There we go.
Good afternoon.
She with the hat.
I got a gift for you from our family. I got I'm from the hereditary chief family of this village. Ancestral name's Katesla, Tlaitsla. My family in 1870 was put on here, this territory, through the federal government. And 1923 amalgamated with 16 other chiefs in their territories. In 1923, they didn't know how to read or write. They didn't understand contract. They couldn't hire a lawyer. Basically, we're tricked. And today, my family is feeling the suffering from this. And 100 years of being ignored. I brought you this. I've got a 1,000-page affidavit in court against the Crown and against the nation, Squamish Nation. This is my grandfather's notebook. He wrote to John Diefenbaker, 1957. This is a record here when he went to go visit the Queen. He wanted to fight for our rights. When Chief Joe Capilano, his father, went in 1906, he was fighting for the land that was being taken. He went to see the King and Queen with two other chiefs, and David Basil and another one from the island. They knew what was going on. They were being taken advantage of. Maybe there's broken promises there. And it's very hurtful, because when you talk about protocol agreement in the Squamish Nation, there wasn't none today in that longhouse. My family should be there. That's the real protocol agreement, or protocol agreements that we have amongst each other. But there's none. It's broken now. There's so much discrimination against me and my family because I speak the truth and I want transparency and accountability. All I'm asking is where the money's coming from and where it's going. Simple questions, and I get attacked. 7 of my businesses taken away from me. My last carving shop I have, my only way of making money, and they're taking that down. This is what's happening to me, to the people who you are speaking to. I'm not here to fabricate or lie. I got a 1,000-page affidavit in the courts. And the federal lawyers I was talking to last week, I asked if he read it. He said, yes. He goes, I don't know what to say. It breaks my heart. It breaks my mother's heart at home that we can't even go in our own longhouse and have a celebration with, and talk with someone like you. And what John Diefenbaker did is spoke with my grandfather, my great-grandfather, in 1950s. And he tried to help, but I don't know what happened. We're muzzled. I sit here, we have general meetings, and they turn the microphone off on me because I'm asking for the truth on where the money's going. I'm not here to fight and argue. This is a horrible feeling. My daughter's scared to come to our village. When I was a kid, this village was so awesome. Now all these other people move here, they hate us. They make us feel unwanted. It's the most horrible feeling you could ever have. And I went to residential school. This is worse than residential school. Because they're supposed to be our people, they say. It's not a very fun place to live, my friend. And I'm asking you a question. Do you want to stop genocide? Because I want you to stop this, and I want the Squamish Nation to stop this genocide against my family, because if I don't fight this right now, we're extinct in 200 years. If we can't benefit from our land that my ancestors fought for us to survive on, we're gone, we're extinct. And that's a really sad truth, and I'm sorry to say it, but my heart's so broken, I'm so beat up, it's horrible. Thrown in jail, lies, because they said I threatened him, and the judge threw it out. The judges know what's happening now. So I just want to leave that with you, my friend. And I got a picture of Marilyn Monroe, my great-grandfather. Read it. When I was 9 years old, Chief Matthias Joe gave me a sign. We're going to go protest against that Pierre Trudeau. Over in Vancouver, your dad. Who's that, uncle? I didn't know. But he had good debates against your dad. They respected each other. All I'm asking you, my friend, is please respect my family. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I know this is a difficult situation. I see the struggles and pains that you've gone through. A couple of things, and you mentioned it's before the courts. Obviously, I'm not going to weigh in on that, and nor can I. The other side of things is it is really important as well that the federal government try to not pick sides or weigh in on how communities choose to govern themselves. And yes, it's important to have transparency and accountability. That's something we all expect in the use of monies. But it is certainly something that I know you fought for a long time, and I really hope that there is able to be progress in this situation, but it's not something the federal government can get involved in directly. Thank you. Question in the back. Yep. No, it was you.
Hi, sorry, I know it's him, but I'm just kindly asking that the president of the FNHDA, which is the other guy in the hat, can speak after him. That's okay?
Okay, we're running out of time, and I'm you know, I know people have been here a long time, and people are already starting to
go
leave.
ahead.
Okay, are you okay? Sorry, you in the hat, I had offered you a chance to ask a question. Would you like to ask a question?
I do.
Okay, no, sorry, I'm speaking to the fellow who put up his hand.
Hereditary Chief Floyd Joseph, just to apologize that he didn't come here today. Okay, he's at home making a carving for my dad. My question was regarding land. The NDP party put a block on Queen Elizabeth land across the street from it. It used to be low-income housing. The NDP party had it been sitting there for the last 35 years. They promised to build more low-income housing. I lived there. It was an awesome place. There was all kinds of people living there, natives, non-natives.
Ma'am, if that's an NDP.
Can you please
In terms of that land, if the NDP government did that, well then that's a provincial issue, because there's never been a federal NDP government at the federal level. I'm not able to do that directly. But I appreciate you sharing that, and I will pass it along. I will pass that along.
That's what we need.
Thank you. Sorry, you in the hat, sir. Give him a mic, please. Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, right there.
Hello, everybody. My name is Marco. I'm an employee here at Squamish Nation. I'm non-Indigenous. So first, I'd like to put my hand up to the Squamish Nation and thank you for allowing me to work and practice what I do here. Hey, Justin. What frustrates me the most about politics is the lack of accountability, just like many other Canadians. People ask questions all the time, and everyone kind of just points fingers. So this is my question directed towards you, not directed towards the MPs or the campaign or legislator or anything like that. Using language like my or I, not language like ow or we. Justin, what do you think your biggest failure has been since being Prime Minister?
Boy, I'm running through which of my many failures I'm going to talk about here, because nobody's perfect. And there's lots of things. If I were to go back, would I do differently? Absolutely. Would I have been more aggressive on electoral reform so we could actually get rid of first past the post and not decide to try and find consensus? When I had a majority in 2015, I could have moved forward right away with a ranked ballot and said, people, you get to pick and rank, say, I want this party, second choice that party, second choice this other party. If I'd done that right away, then we would now no longer have first past the post. But I decided it was probably unfair for a single party with a majority to unilaterally change without other parties being part of it or being consulted on it. So we tried to find consensus around the ability to do it. And the NDP absolutely only wanted proportional representation, which I still think would be bad for Canada. And the Conservatives didn't want anything to do with anything. And therefore, we couldn't get consensus on something that I really wanted to see done. If I had to go back, I probably would have said, nope, we're just going to do it because I got elected with a mandate to do it. So that's one of the things I regret. But it was a call I made that I wish I had done differently. But if I had done it differently, we would have a different system of election that was a permanent change. There would be a permanent change. The governments that follow would have all benefited from a new system of government election that I put in that would have perhaps benefited one party more than another, perhaps would have been unfair. So I had to make the decision, if I can't find consensus, I wasn't going to move forward on it. But that was a decision that I made that I kind of regret, because I think Canada would be better served if people could not vote based on how to block the party they don't want from getting elected, but actually vote for the party that they did want to get elected. How many people in this country would have been voting Green first if they didn't think that that Green vote might have been wasted and get a Conservative elected instead? How many people look and say, okay, does the NDP or the Liberals have a better chance in this riding, and I'll vote for whichever one that is so that we don't elect a blue? Like, I think because over 50% of this country votes progressive, giving people a first and a second choice would have made a huge difference. And I regret that I wasn't able to do that, and it's something that I continue to get criticized for. I wasn't able to keep my promise on first past the post. Yep, I'm getting rid of it. You're right. But it was one of those calls I had to make because I thought the risk of doing something that is a permanent change without consensus across at least a few different parties was probably stretching what a healthy democracy could actually absorb as changes. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about something that I regret. Marco. Here we go.
Thank you, Prime Minister Trudeau, and thank you for taking this time. Like, I honestly thought it was going to be like a half an hour and you're out the door, taking your helicopter back over to wherever you came from. So I really appreciate
I don't fly in a lot of helicopters anymore.
I appreciate you staying a little longer. I want to acknowledge Squamish Nation Council, and I'm hoping you can all stand up. It's really important that we recognize our leadership that are here today. And so I ask if you can stand up and let the rest of the world know